I thank the representative of Norway for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General Guterres, thank you for your sobering briefing and for your strong statement. Your role, along with your personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, and Special Representative Lyons and her team on the ground, is especially vital now. And as we enter an uncertain and crucial period that requires the international community to speak with a clear and unified voice. The United States deeply appreciates the continued efforts of UNAMA and other UN actors on the ground in Afghanistan that are continuing to provide life-saving assistance to Afghans in need. We also thank Norway and Estonia for calling this meeting and India for convening it given the events of the past 72 hours. And we welcome the participation of Afghanistan to this meeting. Over this past weekend, members of the international community joined together to state unequivocally that every Afghan should be able to live in safety, security, and dignity. We also called on all parties in Afghanistan to ensure safe departures and the protection of human life and property. Today, I want to reiterate, reemphasize, and reassert this call. Civilian populations, including journalists and non-combatants, must be protected. Attacks against civilians or civilian objects must stop, and the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Afghan citizens, especially women, girls, and members of minority groups, must be respected. We also call on all parties to prevent terrorism, and we must all ensure Afghanistan cannot ever again be a base for terrorism. We also call on the Taliban to permit humanitarian organizations to continue their vital work in Afghanistan. In addition to the ongoing violence, the Afghan people are suffering acutely from the effects of COVID-19 and drought. These urgent humanitarian needs must remain top of mind for all of us in the coming hours, days, and weeks and beyond. Humanitarian personnel and agencies must have safe, unhindered access to provide life-saving assistance to the increasing numbers of Afghans in need. We are deeply concerned that right now aid is not flowing to people in crisis. According to the World Food Program, more than 500 tons of aid are currently sitting at border crossings taken over by Taliban forces. These aid deliveries must resume immediately, and the World Food Program must have immediate and sustained safe passage to deliver this much needed assistance. Finally and critically, all Afghan nationals and international citizens who wish to depart must be allowed to do so safely. President Biden has made clear that any action that put U.S. personnel or our mission at risk will be met with a swift and strong military response. The United States promises to be generous in resettling Afghans in our own country, and I'm heartened by the pledges we've seen from other nations to do the same. We need to all do more, and the time to step up is now. We urge Afghanistan's neighbors and others in the region and beyond to give refuge, to be it temporary or permanent, to Afghans attempting to flee. And together we must do everything we can to help Afghans who wish to leave and seek refuge. I will close where I began. The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security, and dignity. We in the international community stand ready to assist them. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. You have the floor, please.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Mr.
Je vous
President.
remercie pour l'organisation
I'd
de
like to thank
cette
you for
réunion
convening this
à un
meeting
moment
at a
tragique,
tragic,
historique pour l'Afghanistan.
historic
L'heure est
time for
grave en effet car
Afghanistan.
une
The
page se
situation is very
tourne
serious because
et
this is
l'avenir
a
de ce
new
pays qui a
era,
tant
and
souffert
the future
est
of this
plus
country
incertain
that has
que jamais.
suffered so much is
Nous
more
avons
uncertain
entendu
than
le
ever.
secrétaire
We've
général
heard
exprimer
the
sa
Secretary General
préoccupation et nous la
express his
partageons.
concern, and we share his
Nos yeux sont
concern.
tournés vers Kaboul,
All eyes are
où
on
la paix et la
Kabul,
sécurité de
where peace
l'Afghanistan, mais
and
aussi de la
security of
région sont en
Afghanistan, but
péril.
also of the entire region,
J'aimerais en
are in
premier lieu rappeler
jeopardy.
notre ferme
I would
condamnation de la
firstly like to
violence, des
reiterate our
violations
firm
des droits de
condemnation
l'homme
of
et du droit
violence and human
international
rights
humanitaire
violations
qui se
and
produisent
violations
en
of
ce moment même en
IHL, which
Afghanistan.
are taking place at the moment in
Toutes les
Afghanistan.
parties au conflit doivent
All parties to the
respecter leurs
conflict must
obligations
respect
et
their commitments,
particulièrement
and in
la
particular the
protection des
protection of
civils.
civilians.
Nous appelons à un cessez-le-feu
We would
immédiat
call for an
ainsi qu'au
immediate
respect du droit
ceasefire and the
international.
respect of international law.
Au milieu de cette violence,
In the middle of this
j'ai une pensée
violence,
particulière pour
my
tous ceux
heart
qui ont
goes out
construit
to all those who've
l'Afghanistan
built
moderne d'aujourd'hui.
today's modern
Ils doivent
Afghanistan.
être
They must
protégés.
be protected.
Leur protection, mais plus
Their
largement la
protection,
protection des
but more
civils,
broadly the
en
protection of
particulier des
civilians
femmes
and in
et des
particular
enfants,
women
doit
and
être une
children
priorité
must be an
absolue.
absolute
Les
priority.
responsables d'exactions ne
The perpetrators
demeureront
of
pas
abuse
impunis.
must be brought to
Ce
justice.
Conseil doit
This
rester
council
attentif à
must
l'évolution de la
carefully monitor
situation.
the evolving
Les civils,
situation.
notamment les femmes et les
Civilians,
enfants,
and
ne
in
doivent pas
particular
être
women
oubliés.
and
Les
children,
femmes
must not be
doivent être
forgotten.
protégées,
Women
leurs
must
droits
be
respectés.
protected, their rights must
Les
be
avancées
respected.
démocratiques, la
The
lutte contre la
democratic
criminalité organisée,
progress
en
combating
particulier la lutte
organised
contre la
crime,
drogue,
and in
la
particular
protection
fighting
du patrimoine
drugs,
culturel,
the protection of cultural
toutes ces
heritage,
avancées qui
all
font
of
que
this
l'Afghanistan
progress
a
which
rejoint depuis 20 ans
brought
le concert des
Afghanistan
nations
over the past
ne
20
doivent
years
pas
into
être
the
effacées.
international community must not be
La troisième
wiped out.
priorité est
The
bien
third
entendu l'unité
priority
afghane.
is of
La
course
paix ne peut
Afghan
se faire que si
unity.
tous
Peace
y
can
participent.
only prevail if everyone
Enfin, la
participates
situation
in it.
sécuritaire ne
Finally,
doit
the
pas
security
occulter
situation must
l'urgence de la
not blot
situation
out the
humanitaire.
urgent humanitarian
Le conflit
situation.
augmente le
The
nombre de
conflict has
déplacés,
increased the
elle
number of
accroît les
displaced
besoins
persons and is
déjà
increasing
immenses
the
de la
already
population.
immense needs of the
L'aide
entire
humanitaire doit
population.
parvenir à
Humanitarian
tous.
assistance must
L'accès des
be
personnels
accessible to
médicaux et
all.
humanitaires à
The access
l'ensemble des
of medical
personnes
and
dans le besoin,
humanitarian staff
de même que leur
to all
protection
people
doivent
in
être
need,
garanties.
and also their protection must be
En
guaranteed.
conclusion, Monsieur le
In
Président, je
conclusion,
voudrais rappeler
sir,
que
I
la
would like
France
to
se tient
remind
aux
you that
côtés de la
France
population afghane
stands
et de
shoulder
tous
to
ses
shoulder with the
partenaires pour
Afghan
avancer
people and
sur
all
le
its
chemin de
partners
la paix.
to
Le
make
premier de ces
progress towards
partenaires est
peace.
l'AMANUA.
The primary partner
J'aimerais
is
ici saluer
UNAMA.
le
Here
courage et
I'd
le
like
travail de
to
l'ensemble des équipes de
commend the
cette mission
courage
absolument
on the work
remarquable,
of all of the
sous
teams
la
of the
houlette et la
mission,
coordination
under
de
the
Deborah
auspices and
Lyons.
coordination of Deborah
Je souhaite également
Lyons.
saluer
And
l'action de
I'd
Jean
also
Arnaud.
like
Les
to
Nations
commend the work
Unies
of
ont un
Jean
rôle
Arnaud. The United
essentiel,
Nations have a key
indispensable à jouer en Afghanistan,
role
mais
to
elles ne
play in
pourront pas le faire
Afghanistan,
seules.
but the UN cannot
L'engagement résolu de
work
la communauté
alone. The
internationale aux côtés du
resolute
peuple
commitment
afghan
of the international community
sera tout
standing
aussi
beside the
déterminant dans les
Afghan
mois et
people
les
will
années
also
qui
be
viennent.
decisive
Je vous
over the
remercie.
next few months and years. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Secretary General, for your briefing. Mr. President, what is happening now in Afghanistan is a tragedy. We have long believed that the only path to a sustainable peace in Afghanistan and regional stability lay in a negotiated political settlement. We have worked hard to breathe life into peace negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban, working closely with the US, our leading allies, and other regional powers. The Taliban pledged at Doha to engage in those talks in good faith. Their actions on the ground have betrayed that promise. Mr. President, the Taliban must immediately do three things. First, they need to cease all hostilities and military action to ensure the protection of civilians and to allow the safe and orderly departure of foreign nationals and others who wish to leave. Second, they must commit unequivocally not to harbour or give safe haven to terrorist groups which endanger other countries. And third, the Taliban must honour their promises to protect and uphold human rights, including those of women, girls and minorities. We have seen evidence of Taliban human rights abuses in areas where they have taken control, including persecution of minority groups, harsh restrictions on women, allegations of forced marriage and using civilians as human shields. If the Taliban continue to abuse basic human rights, they cannot expect to enjoy any legitimacy in the eyes of the Afghan people or the international community. Mr. President, given the fragile security situation, Afghanistan is now facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Lack of access has masked the true scale of the problem. Half the population were already in need of humanitarian assistance at the start of the year, and the situation is much worse now. The Taliban must respect international humanitarian law and permit humanitarian organizations to continue their work with unhindered, safe access to those in need. The United Kingdom has long been a leading provider of humanitarian aid to Afghans, both in Afghanistan and in the region. Over recent years, the UK has been proud to be one of the leading contributors to the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund. We will continue to work with our partners in this Council, in the Human Rights Council, and most importantly, in the region, to deliver a more stable and inclusive Afghanistan for all its people. It is vital that the international community coordinate closely in the coming days and weeks to ensure that we speak with a single message in our engagement with Afghanistan. The UK will use its presidency of the G7 and membership of this Council to help forge such closer coordination and to address the humanitarian plight that the Afghan people now face. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya. You have the floor, please.
Good morning. Mr. President, I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the A3+1, namely Kenya, Tunisia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Niger. I thank the Secretary General for his briefing on the latest developments in Afghanistan. The A3+1 reiterates its support for the stabilization efforts deployed by the UN in the search for a durable solution to the Afghan crisis, which has been developing in worrying ways in the past few days. Mr. President, this meeting comes on the heels of a similar meeting we held on the 6th of this month. If at that time we still harbored hope, as slim as that might have been, for the Taliban to heed our appeal and stop their attacks, today we're faced with a fait accompli, with the effective collapse of the Afghan government and a takeover by the insurgents. The A3+1 deplores the violence, human rights abuses, and the loss of life and the suffering endured by the civilian population who were forced to leave their areas because of the latest combat all over the country. We reiterate our call for an immediate end to the hostilities. We reiterate our principal rejection for any seizure of power by force and call for the establishment of an effective dialogue, convinced that the only viable solution to this conflict is a negotiated political settlement. We take note of the discussions between the Taliban and the different Afghan stakeholders. We hope that these negotiations will result in an interim transitional government that would be inclusive and take into account other political voices within the country. We also urge the international community and all regional powers that have leverage on the warring parties to use that influence and advocate for a lasting ceasefire, which is a condition for true dialogue. Mr. President, while it is difficult to predict how the coming days, months, or years will unfold, in particular with regard to the political and security situations, one thing that remains for certain is that Afghanistan is on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe of which the first victims are women and children. The A3+1 would therefore like to highlight the importance of finding an urgent and sustainable solution to the already dire humanitarian crisis, which has been worsened by the recent fighting. The effects of the recent upsurge of violence, combined with those of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, have created a situation where more than a third of the population is experiencing food insecurity and thousands are internally displaced, the overwhelming majority being women and children. We call for the United Nations and the humanitarian agencies to step up their support to the displaced populations and honor the pledges made to the Afghan humanitarian plan. Mr. President, the Afghan people now, more than ever, need the support and solidarity of the international community and regional players to help them navigate this challenging time. Every effort must be made to mitigate the pains of the civil war and to assist them in their search for peace and a stable environment conducive to the pursuit of democratic governance as well as social and economic well-being. the A3+1 continue to welcome and fully support the good offices of the United Nations and all other diplomatic efforts by neighboring countries to reduce tension in order to reach a negotiated solution to the crisis. Furthermore, we emphasize that the search for peace must not be at the expense of Afghan human rights, particularly those of women, children, and Afghanistan's ethnic and religious minorities. While making peace requires settlement between combatants, we believe that the international community does not wish for peace processes to reward and legitimize the use of military interventions and association with terrorist organizations through political recognition. We recall how the Taliban came to be thrown out of power because of their support of Al-Qaeda. Reports of the release of prisoners affiliated to ISIS and Al-Qaeda by the Taliban are extremely disturbing. Such actions will embolden terrorist networks and motivate a resurgence of increased export of terrorism, particularly to countries in regions that have active conflict situations. In its statement of the 6th of August, the A3+1 recalled this Council's decision to split the Al-Qaeda and Taliban sanction lists in response to efforts by the Afghan government to negotiate a peace process with the Taliban that would lead to national reconciliation in Afghanistan. The purpose of this decision was to provide a future lifeline for members of the Taliban that renounce violence and disassociate themselves from Al-Qaeda. Therefore, the Council must not relent in its demand that the Taliban make sustained efforts to embrace peace, cease its links with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and engage in the peace process that will transform Afghanistan to a net exporter of peace. As we conclude, Mr. President, the A3+1 notes that the situation in Afghanistan is extremely volatile and unpredictable. Armed insurgent groups and terrorist groups across the world are watching closely in order to replicate the unraveling events. This Council must therefore carefully consider the decisions it makes, fully aware that building political tracks for entities using terrorism to achieve political ends will in the end be counterproductive. Finally, Kenya, Tunisia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Niger reaffirm their unwavering solidarity with the people of Afghanistan during these uncertain times and reaffirm our support for their vision for a peaceful and progressive country. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to thank the Secretary-General for his presence with us here today and for his very powerful words at the beginning of our meeting. Mr. President, we supported the convening of this urgent meeting today to discuss the unfolding tragic development in Afghanistan. Over the past weeks, we've witnessed, as we've heard in real time, the Taliban seizing control of Afghan cities by force, culminating in the loss of government control in Kabul. We've all seen the scenes of chaos at the airport. We cannot say that we were not warned of this possible outcome. In this room, we have heard many worrying alerts, not least in the courageous testimony of members of Afghan civil society. Sadly and tragically for so many, we failed to heed these warnings. Now we will have to address the consequences. Now, in the face of an unfolding crisis of tragic proportions, this Council will have to assume its responsibilities and act. Mr. President, this is a calamitous situation for all of the people of Afghanistan. As we have consistently done in this chamber, we condemn the appalling violence and the indiscriminate attacks perpetrated against civilians in Afghanistan. The violence and intimidation must end. It's clear that we have entered a new phase in Afghanistan. Peace will only be achieved through an agreed, inclusive and negotiated solution. Violence does not provide legitimacy, nor does it deliver durable peace. Respect for the rule of law and compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, is imperative. We call now for the utmost restraint to protect lives and to ensure that the dire humanitarian needs be addressed. Given the urgency of the situation and the desperate plight facing the Afghan people, it is vital that we act to address the crisis facing Afghanistan. Lives are at imminent risk through worsening violence, displacement, and food insecurity. The international community has a responsibility to respond, to act to protect civilians, and to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people. Safe and reliable humanitarian access must be guaranteed and protected, and the work of all relevant UN agencies and humanitarian partners be facilitated without exception. Mr. President, those who have worked for peace, human rights defenders who have endeavoured tirelessly to promote and protect the rights of their fellow citizens, must not be abandoned now. I wish to address the women of Afghanistan directly. Women who have the most at stake as democratic government dissolves and an uncertain future awaits. Lest there be any doubt as to the gravity of the situation, I am speaking to the women at the airport with their children and families trying to find a way out. To the women hiding in their homes, to the women sleeping in the streets, to the women still fighting for peace and human rights, though it may well now risk their lives. Women of Afghanistan, we hear you, and we hear your pleas to the international community at this dark time. The fear, indignation, and sense of betrayal you feel is understood. It is righteous. I call on this Council to stand with the women of Afghanistan. Their rights and their future participation in Afghan society cannot be sacrificed. This is our shared responsibility at this table. It must be our shared priority also. All of us around the table can and should agree that as a non-negotiable principle in all discussions, the rights of women in Afghanistan must be protected. This is the future of Afghanistan. The Taliban have reportedly said that women have nothing to fear from them, yet we hear multiple and credible reports of summary executions, forced marriages, and of sexual and gender-based violence. Telling the international community what it wants to hear will fool no one. We will not turn a blind eye to the truth. We condemn in the strongest terms the deliberate targeting of women and girls by the Taliban. Girls must be free to attend school, women must be able to participate fully in society, and those who speak up for human rights must be free to do so. In focusing on the needs of women, of course, I want to also condemn reported reprisals, attacks, and summary executions on Afghan men. This also must stop. Mr. President, it is high time to learn from the past, or we will be doomed to see the worst of history repeating itself in Afghanistan. 2 decades of progress are disintegrating on our watch. The Afghan people have worked too hard, lost too much, to see their futures repeat the past of their mothers, their fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers, generations lost to conflict. Strong, enduring peace can only be built by inclusive and representative negotiation. Let us be clear here today, the future governance of Afghanistan can only have the support and endorsement of the international community if it guarantees the full, equal and meaningful participation of women, includes minority groups and youth, upholds human rights and fundamental freedoms, and ensures adherence to the rule of law and accountability as set out in Council Resolution 2513. In our view, the Council needs to be prepared to consider further measures from the toolbox at its disposal as this crisis unfolds. Afghan Minister for Education Ranjina Hamidi spoke in recent hours of her fear, shared by many Afghan women, that she will be forced to pay the price for trying to make Afghanistan a better place, for being active in her society, simply realising her rights. Ireland calls for a clear message today from this Council. While much, including the political future of Afghanistan, is currently uncertain, what is clear is that the failure to fully respect and uphold the rights of all the people of Afghanistan, and in particular the rights and safety of women and girls, cannot and will not be accepted. We owe this to the women of Afghanistan and to all the people of Afghanistan who have kept faith with the promises of the international community for a brighter future. Our obligation is to act in solidarity with them all now in this time of crisis. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico. You have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much,
México
President.
apoya la
Mexico
convocatoria
supports
a
the
esta
convening
reunión
of
de
this
emergencia.
meeting, this emergency
Agradezco
meeting.
al secretario general por su
I
informe
thank the Secretary
sobre los
General for his
acontecimientos más
report on the
recientes
most
en
recent
Afganistán.
events in Afghanistan.
Quisiera agradecer igualmente a
I
las
also wish to thank
delegaciones
the
que están
delegations
aquí presentes y agradezco
present
la
here
presencia
today,
también, la reconocemos
as well
del representante
as
permanente
acknowledging the
de
presence
Afganistán.
of the permanent
En el transcurso de
representative
las
of
últimas
Afghanistan.
semanas y en especial
During
durante este
recent
último
weeks,
fin de semana, el
particularly
conflicto
this
en
last
Afganistán
weekend,
ha entrado en
the
una
conflict
fase
in
más
Afghanistan
destructiva
has
y
entered
más
a more
mortífera.
destructive, deadly phase.
El avance del talibán sobre los
The
principales
advance of the
centros urbanos y
Taliban
ahora
on the
Kabul
main
cambió
urban
drásticamente
centers
la
and now
dinámica de
on
poder
Kabul
y ha tenido un
drastically
impacto
changed the dynamics of
humanitario
power, and
extremadamente
it has had an
preocupante.
extremely concerning humanitarian
La
impact.
ofensiva militar deja claro
military
que sigue
offensive
sin
makes it
negociarse
clear
un cese al fuego
that a
y que
ceasefire
las
has
cifras
not
de
yet been
víctimas por el
negotiated,
conflicto
and the figures
son
of
las más altas
victims
registradas.
of the conflict are the highest recorded.
México rechaza la vía de la
Mexico
fuerza y de la
rejects the use of
violencia
force
y
and of
subraya
violence.
enfáticamente que debe
We stress
respetarse el
emphatically
marco institucional
that the
del país
institutional
y
framework of
buscarse
the country
un
must be
proceso de
respected.
reconciliación
A
nacional.
process of
El
national
futuro de
reconciliation
Afganistán debe
must be
ser
sought.
decidido
Afghanistan's
democráticamente
future
por
must be
todas y por todos
democratically
los
decided
afganos.
upon by all
Mi país
Afghans.
igualmente deplora de manera
Mexico
inequívoca
also
los ataques
unequivocally
deliberados contra la
deplores the
población civil.
deliberate attacks on the civilian population.
Los reportes de ejecuciones
The reports
sumarias
of summary
de ataques
executions,
deliberados contra
deliberate
mujeres,
attacks on
apaleamientos, restricciones y
beatings,
censura de medios de
restrictions, and the
comunicación
censure
son
of
señal de
means of
alarma para la
communication
comunidad
are all alarm
internacional.
signs for the international community.
El precio más alto del atrincheramiento
The
político y
highest
militar
price
en
of the
Afganistán
political and
lo
military
continúan
entrenchment in
pagando
Afghanistan
los
is
más
being paid
vulnerables.
for by the most vulnerable.
La catastrófica trayectoria de
The
violencia
catastrophic
afecta a
trajectory
una
of
población
violence
que se
affects a
encuentra en
population
condiciones cada
which
vez
finds
más
itself in
precarias y
increasingly
con muy pocas
precarious
opciones,
conditions, with
especialmente
very
para
few
mujeres y
options,
niños.
particularly for women and girls.
Personal humanitario, médicos,
Humanitarian
traductores
personnel,
y otros
doctors,
prestadores de servicios
interpreters, and other
internacionales
international
también se
service
encuentran en
providers
especial
are
vulnerabilidad en
also
estos momentos.
especially vulnerable at
Y
this
síntoma
moment.
de ello es la ola
A sign
masiva
of this
de
is a massive
desplazamientos que
wave
observamos
of
y la
displacements we have
desesperación de
noted
los civiles
and
por
the
huir del
despair,
país.
the desperate efforts of civilians to flee the country.
Señor presidente, la campaña
Mr.
militar
President,
ha resultado
the
en un
military
cambio
campaign
drástico de
has led
control
to a
sobre el
drastic change
territorio
of control
y de los medios
over the
materiales.
territory and material resources.
Mi país, México, llama urgentemente a que
My
la
country,
comunidad
Mexico,
internacional
urgently calls for the
evalúe muy
international
seriamente las
community to
transferencias
seriously
de
evaluate
armas
the transfers
que
of
podrían ser
weapons,
desviadas o
which
acabar
might be
en manos
diverted or
equivocadas.
end up in the wrong hands.
Mientras exista la proliferación de
as the
armamento,
proliferation
el
of
Talibán y
weaponry
otros grupos
goes on, the
habrá
Taliban
sustento
and
para
other
consolidar
groups
sus objetivos
will
por la
have the
vía de la
means
fuerza.
to reach
Por ello,
their
es que
ends
urgimos a que
through
no se
force.
aprueben transferencias
This is why we
irresponsables,
urge that
ya que se
irresponsible
ejerzan los máximos
transfers
estándares
not be approved,
internacionales
and that the
para
highest
contener el
international
impacto
standards be
catastrófico
applied
de la
to
situación por la que
contain the
atraviesa
catastrophic
Afganistán.
impact of the situation
Pese a
Afghanistan
los
is going
acuerdos
through.
firmados y la
Despite
existencia
the
de un
agreements
robusto
signed
marco de derecho
and the
internacional
existence of a
sobre combate al
robust
terrorismo,
framework of
nos
international
preocupa
law
también
fighting
que se abra
terrorism,
la
we are
puerta
also
a que
concerned
Afganistán
that the
sea,
door is
una vez
open
más,
for Afghanistan
refugio
to
seguro
once
para
again
grupos
become
terroristas.
a safe haven for terrorists.
Cualquier escenario para el futuro de
Any
Afganistán
scenario for
debe asegurar
Afghanistan's
que
future
esto no
must
suceda.
ensure that this does not happen.
Señor presidente, la comunidad
Mr.
internacional
President,
y
the
en
international
especial el
community,
Consejo de Seguridad
particularly
debe
the
presentar
Security
un frente
Council,
común para
must
dejar en
prevent a
claro que el
common,
presente
present
curso de
a common
acción
front
resulta inaceptable
to
y que se tienen que
show
respetar
that the
los
use
compromisos
of
acordados
force is
y
unacceptable
privilegiar la
and
vía
that
del
the
diálogo
agreed
y de la
commitments must be
negociación
respected
política.
and that dialogue and political
Adicionalmente,
negotiation
solicitamos a
are
aquellos que
given
mantienen
prime
interlocución
place.
directa con el talibán
We also call
a que
on those who
expresen
have
su más
direct
sonora
contacts
condena a los
with
ataques
the
contra
Taliban
civiles, en
to
particular
roundly
mujeres,
condemn
niños
attacks
y
on civilians,
minorías, y
particularly
llamar
women,
urgentemente
girls, and
a retomar
minorities.
las
And
negociaciones de una forma
we
constructiva.
call for
Muchas gracias.
a resumption of constructive negotiations as quickly as possible. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Мы благодарим генерального
We would like
секретаря
to
ООН
thank the UN
за
Secretary
его
General
соображения и
for
оценки
his thoughts
ситуации
and
в
views on the
Афганистане.
situation in Afghanistan.
Благодарим также
We would
постоянного
also like to
представителя
thank the permanent representative
Афганистана
of
посла
Afghanistan,
Гулама Исаева.
Ambassador Ghulam Isakai.
Внимательно следим за
We are closely
стремительно
following the
меняющейся ситуацией в
fast-changing
Афганистане.
situation in Afghanistan.
С момента
As
объявления
soon
о
as
выводе
the
иностранных
withdrawal of
войск
foreign
мы все
forces was
получали
announced,
тревожные
we
новости
all
об
heard
эскалации
worrying
насилия и
reports about
жертв.
an uptick in violence and the number of victims.
Вместе с тем мы
Furthermore,
видели,
as we've seen,
что крупные афганские
major
города
Afghan
были
cities
сданы без
fell
особого
without
сопротивления.
much resistance.
С момента последнего
Since the
обсуждения
last
в Совете
discussion in the
прошло всего 10
Council,
дней,
just 10 days have
а
passed.
обстановка в стране
However, the
за этот
situation in the
период
country over
изменилась
that
до
time has
неузнаваемости.
changed beyond recognition.
Сегодня наши взоры
Today,
обращены на
all of our
Кабул,
eyes are on
который
Kabul,
накануне спешно
which
покидали
yesterday was
первые лица
quickly abandoned
республики,
by the country's
простые
leader,
афганцы,
ordinary
а также
Afghans,
часть
and also a
дипломатического
part of the
корпуса.
diplomatic corps.
Очевидно,
It is
что
clear
такой
that such
стремительный
a
разворот
sharp
стал
turnabout
неожиданностью
took
для всех,
everyone by
включая
surprise.
тех, кто еще
This
недавно
involved
громко
those who very
заявлял о
recently
высоком уровне
made public
боеспособности
pronouncements
подготовленных и
about the degree of military
обученных за 20
preparedness
лет
of the
афганских
Afghan
силовиков.
law enforcement structures who were prepared and trained over the past 20 years.
В целом продолжаем внимательно отслеживать
Broadly,
ситуацию
we
в
are
стране.
continuing to closely monitor the situation in the
На
country.
данном этапе полагаем, что
Currently, we
поддаваться
believe that
паническим
there is
настроениям не
no
стоит.
point in panicking.
Важно, что
The main
удалось
point
избежать
is
массового
that a
кровопролития среди
widespread
гражданского
bloodbath
населения.
among civilians has been avoided.
Призываем все
We
вовлеченные
urge
афганские
all
стороны
Afghan parties
воздерживаться от
to
вооруженных
refrain from
действий и
hostilities
содействовать
and
урегулированию
to
мирным
foster
путем.
a settlement peacefully.
Исходим из того,
We
что
believe
международное
that the
сообщество
main
обязано
power
не
players,
оставлять
or the
усилий,
international community
чтобы
rather,
помочь Афганистану.
must help Afghanistan. They must pool
Помочь
their
Афганистану
efforts.
достичь национального
And this
примирения.
is to assist Afghanistan achieve national
Чем,
reconciliation.
в частности, активно занималась расширенная тройка в лице
The
России, США, Китая и
Troika,
Пакистана.
Russia, China, and Pakistan, the expanded Troika, has been actively engaged in this.
Полагаем, что важную
We
роль в этом
believe
мог
that an
бы сыграть
important
Иран.
role could be played by Iran as well here.
Что касается
As
наших
regards
дальнейших шагов,
our future
официальных
official
шагов
steps, our
в
official
отношении
steps
талибов, то мы будем
regarding the
определяться с
Taliban,
этими
we
шагами
will
в
interact
зависимости
with
от
them
развития ситуации
irrespective of
и
the
их
evolving
конкретных действий.
situation and their specific actions.
По имеющимся у нас
According
сведениям,
to
талибы
our
уже
reports, the
приступили к
Taliban
наведению
have
общественного
already
порядка,
sought to
а
bring
также
public
подтвердили
order
гарантии
and have also
безопасности
confirmed
гражданских
security
лиц
guarantees for
и
civilians
сотрудников иностранных
and for
дипломатических
the
миссий.
foreign diplomatic mission staff.
Рассчитываем, что в
We trust
сложившихся
that in
условиях
the current
дипперсоналу и
circumstances, the
ООНовскому
security of
присутствию в
diplomatic staff and the
Афганистане
UN presence
будет
in
обеспечена
Afghanistan will
безопасность,
be
а
ensured
их
and their
учреждениям
institutions will
неприкосновенность.
enjoy immunity.
В этих условиях
In these
посольство России в
circumstances, the
Кабуле
Russian embassy in
продолжает
Kabul is
функционировать в
continuing
штатном
to
режиме.
operate normally.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
нас по-прежнему
we are
беспокоит
still concerned
сохраняющееся в
by
стране
the ongoing
присутствие
presence of
террор-угрозы,
terrorist threats in
включая ИГИЛ
Afghanistan,
Хорасан,
including
чья
ISIL
терактивность
Khorasan.
рискует
Their
выплеснуться
terrorist
за пределы
activity is likely to
Афганистана
spill
и
across
ставить тем
Afghanistan's
самым
borders
под удар
and thus
безопасность
will
соседних
threaten
государств
the
Центральной Азии.
security of neighboring countries in Central Asia.
С терроризмом неразрывно
Terrorism
связаны и
is
наркопроблемы.
inextricably linked to the drugs problem.
Деградация обстановки в
The deteriorating
Афганистане за
situation in
последние
Afghanistan
месяцы
over
привела и
recent
к резкому
months
ухудшению
has led to a
гуманитарной
sharp
ситуации.
worsening humanitarian situation.
Обеспокоенность
Of
вызывают
concern
многочисленные
are
сводки
the
о
numerous
количестве
reports
внутренне
about the number
перемещенных
of
лиц и потоках
IDPs
беженцев за
and the
пределы
flows of
страны.
refugees across the country's borders.
Это создает
It
дополнительную
creates
нагрузку
an
на
additional
сопредельные
burden
республики,
for
включая
neighboring states,
Таджикистан,
including Tajikistan,
Узбекистан, Иран
Uzbekistan,
и
Iran,
Пакистан,
and Pakistan.
не говоря уже о
Not
риске
to
инфильтрации в
mention
регион
the
боевиков,
risk
в том
of
числе
fighters
под видом
infiltrating the
беженцев.
region into Alia by pretending to be refugees.
Находимся в регулярном
We are in
контакте со
regular
всеми
contact
5
with
странами
all
Центральной
5
Азии, как в
Central Asian
двустороннем
countries,
плане, так и по
both
линии
bilaterally
региональных
and
организаций
through
ШОС
regional
и
organizations
ОДКБ.
such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the
Господин
CSTO,
председатель,
the Collective
мы
Security
по-прежнему
Organization.
заинтересованы в
Mr.
скорейшем
President, we
мирном
still
урегулировании
want
в
to see a swift,
Афганистане,
peaceful settlement in
последующей
Afghanistan
стабилизации
and
в
a subsequent
стране и
stabilization
ее
of the country and
постконфликтном
its
восстановлении.
post-conflict recovery.
Убеждены,
We are
что от
convinced
прекращения
that an
многолетней
end to the
кровопролитной войны и
years-long bloody
нацпримирения
war and
выиграют
having
все.
national reconciliation would
Народу
benefit all,
Афганистана,
the
его
people of
региональные
Afghanistan,
соседи
its
и
regional
мир в
neighbors,
целом.
and the world as a whole.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam. You have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you, President. And I thank the Secretary General for your presence and for your briefings. I also welcome the presence of representative of Afghanistan to our briefing today. Mr. President, we have followed the situation in Afghanistan, especially in the recent days, with deep concerns. This situation may affect badly the security and stability of not only Afghanistan, but also the region, especially neighboring countries. We are particularly concerned about the high number of civilian casualties reported over the past few weeks. In this regard, I wish to highlight the following. First, the utmost priority now is to protect civilians. All parties must respect their obligation under international humanitarian and human rights law, ensure the protection of civilians, particularly the most vulnerable, such as women and children. Indispensable services to civilian population must be ensured. The safety and security of UN personnel, humanitarian workers, foreign citizens, international organizations, diplomatic mission and personnel must be guaranteed. Second, we join others in calling for an end to violence, restoration of security and civil order. We call on all parties in Afghanistan to engage in dialogue, resolve their differences, and promote national reconciliation, respecting aspiration of Afghan people for a long-term peace, stability, and development of the country. Third, urgent efforts are needed to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe of the country. Essential services for civilian population must not be disrupted, including those to address food insecurity and COVID-19 pandemic. Immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access must be ensured to reach the Afghan people in need. We also call on the UN, regional and international partners to redouble their effort to achieve the above-mentioned priorities, with special urgent attention to the protection and the assistance to civilian population in this difficult time. Last but not least, we would like to commend the effort of UNAMA and stress the importance of ensuring the security and safety of the mission. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
欢迎古德雷斯秘书
I
长
welcome
出席今天会
Secretary
议，
General to the
也
meeting
感谢
today,
他刚才
and
的
I
通
thank
报。
him for the briefing.
我也认真听取了阿富
I have
汗
listened
常驻代表的
to
发
the
言。
statement by the representative of Afghanistan.
当前阿富汗局
The
势已发
situation
生
in
重大
Afghanistan
变
has
化，
undergone major changes.
我们尊重阿
We
富汗人民
respect
的
the will
意愿
and choices of
和选择。
Afghan people.
阿富汗战乱已经
The
持
war
续
in
40多
Afghanistan
年，
has lasted for more than 40
停止
years.
战争，
Stopping the war
实现和平，
and achieving peace
既是3000多万
is
阿富
not
汗人民
only
的一致
the
心声，
unanimous aspiration of more than
也
30
是
million
国际
Afghan
社会
people.
和地
It
区
is
国
also
家
the
的
common
共同期盼。
expectation of the international community and the regional countries.
当务之急是
The
尽
pressing
快
task at
恢
the
复
moment
和
is to
平、
restore
稳
peace,
定和秩
stability,
序，
and order as soon as possible,
最大限度
so
避
as
免
to
无谓
avoid
的伤亡
unnecessary casualties
和
and
产
large-scale
生大规
refugees
模
to
难
the
民。
ultimate extent possible.
驻阿外交机构和
The
外交
rights
人
and
员的
interests
权
of
益，
diplomatic missions and
不可侵
personnel
犯。
in Afghanistan are inviolable.
在阿外国公民的
The
安全和
safety,
利益
security, and
必
interests
须
of
得
foreign
到尊
nationals
重
in
和保
Afghanistan
障。
must be respected and guaranteed.
阿富汗各方均有
All
责任
parties in Afghanistan
保护
have the
民众生
responsibility
命
to
和财
protect
产安
people's
全，
lives and property.
并为外国公
They
民
should
安
provide
全居
assurance
留
for the safe
和有
residence
序撤
and
离
orderly
提
evacuation
供
of
保障。
foreign citizens.
主席先生，
President,
中方始终主张
China has
政治
always
解决是
maintained
阿富
that the
汗问题
political
的
solution
唯一
is the
出路。
only way out for Afghanistan.
当前，
At
阿富汗
present,
国家前途
Afghanistan's
处在
national
历史
prospects
性
are
的
at a
十字路
historic
口。
crossroads.
中方注意到，
China takes note
昨天 阿富汗塔利班
what
方
was
面
said
表
by
示
the Afghan Taliban
阿富汗
yesterday
战争
that
业已
war
结
in
束，
Afghanistan had ended
将协商建立
and that
开
it
放
would
包容的伊
negotiate
斯
to
兰政
establish
府，
an open, inclusive
并
Islamic
采取
government,
负责任行动，
and it would take
确保
responsible
阿富汗
actions to
公民
ensure the
和
safety
外
of
国
Afghan
驻阿使
citizens
团安
and
全。
foreign missions in the country.
中方期待这些
China
表态
expects that these
得到落
commitments
实，
will be fulfilled
确保阿富汗局
so
势
as to
实现
ensure
平稳过
a
渡，
smooth transition of the
各
situation,
类恐怖主义
curb all
和
kinds of
犯罪
terrorism
行径
and
得到
criminal
遏制
acts,
让阿富汗人民
keep
远离
the
战
Afghan
乱，
people away from
重
wars
建
and
美
chaos
好家
and
园。
build their beautiful homeland.
我们希望阿富
We
汗塔
hope
利班
that Taliban in
从阿
Afghanistan
各党派
will、unite with all
各民
parties
族
and
团结
ethnic
起来，
groups in Afghanistan
建立符合
to
阿自身国
establish
情、
a broad and
广
inclusive
泛
political
包容
structure
的政治架构，
that suits its national
为阿
conditions
实现持
in
久
order
和
to
平
lay the foundation
奠定
to
基础。
achieve lasting peace in the country.
过去20多年里，
In the last 20
伊
years,
斯兰国、基地组织、
terrorist organizations
中
such
伊
as
运等恐怖
Islamic
组
State,
织
Al-Qaeda,
在
and
阿富汗
ITIM
境内
have gathered
聚
and
集发展，
developed and
对
developed
国
in
际和
Afghanistan,
地区和平与安全
posing
构
a
成
serious
严重威
threat
胁
to。international and regional peace and
阿富
security.
汗绝不能再度成
Afghanistan
为
must
恐
never
怖分
again
子天堂。
become a haven for terrorists.
这是阿富汗未来
This
任
is the
何
bottom
政治
line
解决
that
方
must
案
be held
必须
firmly
坚守
for
的底
any
线。
future political solution in Afghanistan.
希望阿富汗塔利班
We hope
切
that
实
the
履行承
Taliban in
诺，
Afghanistan will earnestly
彻底
deliver
切
on their
断同
commitments
一切恐
and
怖
make
组
a
织
clean
的
break
联
with
系
the。terrorist organizations.
各国应根据
All
国际法
countries
和
should
安理会
fulfill their
决议履
obligations in
行义务，
accordance with international law
合
and
作
Security
打击
Council
一切恐怖
resolutions,
主义，
work with each
坚
other
决防
in
止
combating terrorism
伊
in
斯
all
兰
its
国、
forms and
基地组
manifestations,
织、
and take
中伊
resolute
运
actions
等恐怖
to
组
prevent
织
terrorist
趁乱
organizations such as
做大。
Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and ITIM from taking advantage of
当
this
前阿富汗
chaos.
人道局势
As we speak,
十分严
the
峻，
humanitarian situation in
人道
Afghanistan
援
is
助
very
和
dire.
疫情防控均面
Humanitarian
临
assistance
巨
and
大压力。
epidemic prevention and control are under
国际社
tremendous
会应
pressure.
加大向阿富汗
The international
和接收
community
了
should
大
scale
量
up
流离失所者的
humanitarian
阿富汗
assistance
邻
to
国，
Afghanistan and its
提供人
neighbors
道
that
援
have
助，
received a large number of
帮助
displaced
缓解
persons
地区
from
人道危
Afghanistan
机。
to help alleviate the regional humanitarian
有关
crisis.
各方应当确保
The
国
relevant
际人道
parties
救援
should
机构的
ensure
工
that
作
the work of
不
international
受阻
humanitarian
碍。
relief agencies can
国
continue
际社会
unhindered.
还应继
The
续帮助
international
阿
community should
及其
also
邻国
continue
尽快
to
控
help
制疫情。
Afghanistan and its neighbors to control the pandemic as soon as possible.
主席先生，
President,
阿富汗当前乱
the
局
chaos currently in
同外国
Afghanistan is
部队
directly
的仓
related
促
to
撤
the
出
hasty withdrawal of
有
foreign
直接关
troops.
系。有关国家
Relevant
应当
countries
切实兑
should
现
earnestly
支
deliver
持阿
the
富汗
commitment
和
to
平、
support
和
peace,
解、重建的
reconciliation,
承
and
诺，
reconstruction in Afghanistan,
在阿富汗问题上发
and
挥
play
建
a
设性作
constructive
用，
role on the issue of Afghanistan.
在尊重阿人主导
On the
权
basis of respecting the
和阿
leadership
邻
of
国
Afghanistan
有关
and
努
relevant
力的基
efforts
础上，
of the neighboring countries
在政治、
in the
安
political,
全、
security,
发展、
development,
人道、
humanitarian,
禁毒等
and
领域，
anti-narcotics fields,
继续向阿
constructive
提供
assistance to
建设性
Afghanistan
帮助。
should be provided on a continuing basis.
刚才不少成员在发言中提到，
A few council
希望阿富
members
汗
said
邻
in
国
their
和地
statements
区国
that
家
they wish to see
发
that
挥更大的作
greater
用。
roles played by Afghan's neighbors and regional
据了解，
countries.
一些阿
We
邻
learned
国和地区国
that
家
some
提出
regional countries and
参
Afghan's
加
neighbors
今天会议的
had
请求，
made requests to participate in today's
很遗
meeting.
憾，
It
他
is
们的请
regrettable
求
that
未被允
their
许。
requests were not granted.
长期以来，联
For
合
a
国
long
驻
time,
阿富汗援助
UNAMA
团
mission
为支持阿富
has
汗和
played
平
an
重建
important
发
role
挥
in
了重要
supporting the
作用。
peaceful reconstruction of
考
Afghanistan.
虑到当前地
Given
面
the
形
current
势已发
situation
生
on
重
the
大变
ground
化，
that has undergone
我
major
们常务秘
changes,
书长
we hope
就保障
that
联
the
阿团
Secretary
人员
General
安
will
全
make
做出
proper
妥善安
arrangements
排。
to ensure the safety of personnel of
也
the
期待
mission.
秘书长就未
We
来
also look
联合
forward
国在阿
to
的
the
存
Secretary
在
General
问题，
presenting practical and
尽
actionable
快
views
向安理
and
会
recommendations
提
to
出
the
切
Security
实
Council
可
as soon
行
as
的
possible
意
on
见
future UN presence in
和建议。
Afghanistan.
谢谢。
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of India. Allow me at the outset to warmly welcome the Secretary General and his very important remarks. I also welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Afghanistan to the United Nations. The Council is meeting for the second time in a period of 10 days to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. In this short period of time, we have witnessed dramatic changes in the situation. We have also seen very unfortunate scenes at the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. There is widespread panic among the people. Women and children are in distress. Incidents of firing have been reported from the city, including at the airport. While the security situation remains precarious, a grave humanitarian crisis is unfolding. We have heard urgent appeals from all quarters, including from the Secretary General. It is time for the international community, in particular this Council, to act and ensure an immediate cessation of violence and contain any possible crisis and mitigate its consequences. As a neighbor of Afghanistan, as a friend of its people, the current situation prevailing in the country is of great concern to us in India. Afghan men, women, and children are living under a constant state of fear. They are uncertain about their future. Everyone is concerned about the increasing violations of the fundamental rights of the Afghan citizens. Afghans are worried about whether their right to live with dignity would be respected. There are many unanswered questions. We hope that the situation stabilizes soon and the parties concerned address the humanitarian and security issues. We also hope that there is an inclusive dispensation which represents all sections of Afghan society. Voices of Afghan women, aspirations of Afghan children, and the rights of minorities must be respected. A broader representation would help the arrangement gain more acceptability and legitimacy. The current situation in Afghanistan has numerous challenges. However, there are a few opportunities. If there is a zero tolerance for terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and it is ensured that the territory of Afghanistan is not used by terrorist groups to threaten or attack any other country, then Afghanistan's neighbors and the region would feel safer. The Secretary General has underlined this unequivocally just now. Afghanistan has already seen enough bloodshed in the past. It is time for the international community to come together unitedly, rising above any partisan interests, to support the people of Afghanistan in their desire for peace, stability, and security in the country, and to enable all Afghans, including women, children, and minorities, to live in peace and dignity. India has contributed significantly in recent years to the development of the country. In this context, Indian development projects has been undertaken in critical areas of power, water, road, healthcare, education, agriculture, and capacity building. India's emphasis has been on the welfare and the well-being of the people of Afghanistan. Before the current crisis unfolded, India had ongoing development projects in every one of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. As underscored by Council members, we need to continue to support the robust work of UNAMA and ensure their safety. We call upon the parties concerned to maintain law and order, ensure the safety and security of all concerned, including UN, diplomatic, and consular personnel, and observe human rights and international humanitarian law in all circumstances in Afghanistan. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I will now adjourn the meeting so that the Council can continue its discussion on the subject in closed consultations. I would kindly ask all observers to exit the chamber upon the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.